Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Teach, Sleep, Repeat. My name is Dylan.
And my name's Hayden.
How you doing, Hayden?
I'm all good, mate. How are you?
I'm fantastic. I'm great. We're halfway through term 4 and we're heading towards Easter. Everyone knows Easter's a longer break. I don't know, there's something about understanding that's on the horizon that is kind of getting me through this term. You wanted to talk about something, though.
I mean, that's linked to what I want. I want to have a bit of a not a moan necessarily, but just like a...
moan.
We don't moan on this podcast. What's there to moan about in teaching?
How could you moan?
What's there to moan about? Nothing. Workload. I moan about that. So I don't know. Is this a phenomenon? It is. It's a phenomenon in all schools, right? Okay. Where I feel like workload is already pretty much maxed out, isn't it? Teaching is not a job where you're like, we had a couple of easy weeks.
Yeah.
A couple of easy weeks, just came in today, didn't have any work on, no one called in. Like, it doesn't work like that. It's just always completely full on. Your workload is maxed out, and your directed time is maxed out, and you're doing 10 hours extra every week anyway. But sometimes I just find myself so stressed because 3 things will just happen at once. And it wasn't even anyone's fault. Like, so basically, for example, like in our school right now, I'm in year 6. We're just about to do next week, or this week when you're listening, our mock week, because our like official mock SATs week, because SATs are coming up. We're also just happen to be on our like in our cycle of writing. We're doing an independent write this week, which comes with a massive amount of marking, as you know. So that's all this week. Oh, and we have one of our twilight staff meetings this week as well. So one of our twilight, they go till 5:30. So one of our days, I'm not going to get any marking done, if anything, any assessments or independent writes, because we're going to be sat in a staff meeting for 2 hours. And I look at that and I'm just, and there's parents' evening next week. Well, no, in a couple of weeks. And I'm like, how is this okay? Like in any other job ever, I feel like there'd be some sort of protocol where it's like, oh no, we don't do that because, you know, we don't pay staff to just work another 12 hours this week. Like, but that doesn't happen. So, or
it does happen. And because I think there'll be lots of people listening in different professions who are thinking, oh no, this happens. We have really busy times of the year. Of course we do. But usually with that, maybe it's more hands on deck. Maybe it's paid overtime. Maybe it's I physically can't get this done, so a bit more forward planning as to try and spread things out. But I do think play devil's advocate slightly here. I do think in many jobs you do have peaks and troughs. Sure. I think the biggest problem you're pointing to here, perhaps for people to understand this, is teaching very rarely has that trough. That
is what I'm saying. We're already at that peak constantly.
Yeah,
constantly there. We can't do any more. It's mad. If anything, we just need to take things away. Like that's how that. I don't know. I just look at that and I'm like, I look at my workload this week, right? And I'm like, it's completely unreasonably unmanageable. So completely.
Why? Just to explain to people then, just to flesh this out a bit, because I can completely see what you mean here. But I'm looking at it thinking, okay, you've got mock SATs.
Yeah.
Doesn't that must mean much less planning to do, and the marking you would have done anyway. Is it just replaced with assessment marking, or is there more to that? And with a twilight, sure, that's 1 extra hour. Because you would have had a staff meeting anyway. My question to you is, could you maybe just lay out how much extra work you think that's actually going to cause you? Because I think there might be a lot of people in SLT, and especially you're talking about our school right now. I do not believe for 1 second anyone has maliciously thought,
they haven't.
I'm going to top load this. Just explaining from the teacher's point of view then, being completely honest, how is that affecting your week then? What's going to have to give?
So all those things individually, it's kind of like, they're not so bad. And you know what? I have independent writes every 3 weeks anyway. It's not like this is suddenly a new thing. My only point here is that it's like, I don't mind doing the odd big thing, maybe once a week. But when there's 3 of them that happen at the same time, it's a bit like, oh, that's just mad now. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, we have twilights once a term. They're okay on their own. We have assessment weeks most terms. They're all right by themselves. It does come with more marking. Yeah, a little bit less planning. We're still planning for but it only takes like 1 or 2 or maybe 3 of the lessons of the week. We've still got to plan the rest of the week. And I've got a plan for next week as well. So I've got that on top of this week. But the marking is insane. Like marking assessments, I just happen to have 2 sets where I actually have 32 kids in both, because we have different sets across our school. Some teachers have a smaller set. They just happen to have less tests to mark. I've got loads of tests to mark. It will take me about 3 or 4 times longer than it would do to mark a lesson.
Sure.
And then we do sort of gap analysis. We do all sorts of data analysis, input, all this stuff. It just takes forever. And my problem is only that. How has this all come together at once? Because what I'm not going to do now is all of that work in 1 week. It has to get spread out. So if there's a deadline that, we need the writing mark by next week and the assessment data needs to be in next week as well. And also you can't do any of it on Wednesday because you've got this long staff meeting. I'll just be like, okay, no. Fortunately, our school's pretty cool, and I'll just be able to say this now. But like, oh yeah, that's crazy. Well, let's spread it over. But I feel bad because I know this happens in other schools, honestly, all the time.
Yeah,
all the time, and they'll just be like, yeah, get it done, get it done, and people will sacrifice their whole weekends for it.
What would you say to someone? Because I did a post this week on TikTok and Instagram about just very much going into detail like we did recently into our conditions and our in that pay document as to directed time and additional hours. And a few of the comments were basically saying, yeah, you're absolutely right, but like it's got to get, the teachers sometimes just need to grow a backbone. Like it was almost digging teachers out the opposite way. We often people, lazy teachers not doing anything. Well, this was the opposite in terms of they were saying, no, do you know what? It's the teacher's fault sometimes. They need to stand up and say no. Where do you stand on that kind of opinion? Because I found myself agreeing, but also thinking it was really unhelpful. And I think that there's ways to talk to teachers to lessen this. So
Sure.
imagine now you're talking to someone listening to this who's in a very similar situation to what you find yourself in this week. What would you say to them as to how to mitigate this, where they're just going to end up spending another 6 hours having no evenings and sacrificing a day of their weekend to get this done because they feel they have to? What would you say to them?
I'd say if you're a team, so if you're working in more than a one-form entry, right, it's not just you doing this. If you're working in a team, you need to just talk to your team and all accept that this is an unreasonable amount of workload to do. Let's all agree on the actual actions we're going to take. Because where it falls down is you've got 4 members of staff doing this. 2 members of staff are like, oh yeah, this is crazy. I'm not doing that. I've got plans these evenings and weekends. So they want the data next week. Well, we'll have to wait another week because I can't literally do it. And then there'll be the other 2 teachers who are like, oh yeah, I'll cancel all my plans. I'll work every evening and the entire weekend and get it done. And then we all come in on Monday. I've done all of it and you haven't. That's when it falls down because then it looks bad. You need a bit of collective action, right?
Because then
my advice.
Yeah.
Go on.
No, SLT think at that point, oh, that's acceptable then. You're just being lazy.
Yeah, exactly that. But if you're a one-form entry school, then it's hard. That whole backbone thing. It's trickier because you're on your own now. You've got to stand up for yourself. But in a team, particularly, I would say, come on, think as a team. Let's all agree on what's actually acceptable to get done. We're all going to do extra work. We're not going to pretend we're not doing extra work. Let's just give it a bit more of a time frame. Okay, we're going to mark the independent rights this week. Next week, we haven't got an independent right or a twilight, so we will mark those assessments and we'll just push back the deadline by a week. That's what I would want to see as a team, but I don't think in most schools. I don't think you'd see that in most places.
What I like about what you said there is, and I think it's quite powerful as teachers, is just pointing out to people that you're not saying no to doing it. Like you're not saying no. You understand that twilight CPD is really important. Yeah. You understand that doing this assessment mock exam for the children is really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you also understand that independent writing is really important coming up to moderation. Yeah. And what all you're saying here is like, let's rejig this. Let's not, we always say to people, sometimes the solution is to not do it. Let's be really clear. We mean things like displays, things you understand don't really have an impact. Yeah. But as a professional, you're sitting here saying, no, I get all of this. We do this for a reason. I actually agree with doing everything. You're not saying let's not do any of it. You're just saying, okay, now we've agreed we need to do it. Let's be reasonable. Yeah.
I'm just saying, can we spread it out? That's all I'm saying. Be reasonable. Like it annoys me when it, like, come on, surely we can plan ahead and not make sure this doesn't happen.
No, I think that's
so, well done, you've done all this work. You've got staff, you've got parents' evenings next week. It's like, oh man, so I've got another heavy week. It's just a bit of a pain, bit of a gripe. It's one of those things. It happens, but I wish it didn't. Anyway, how's your week been?
Yeah, good. I guess looking back at my week, rather uneventful in terms of things happening, just felt like I don't want to say normal week when you're in school. It's never a normal week, but it felt like it just kind of breezed by nicely. Children, you feel like at this point of the year, I do feel like you really do start seeing that progress with them, where you've embedded so much, whether it's academically or socially or just them behaving themselves. It feels like it's coming together, which is really nice. It's the part of the year where interventions become really acute, I think. So the idea of interventions, anyone listening is not sure what I'm talking about, that is targeting a group of children who still don't quite grasp something that you think by the end of the year they really should.
Yeah.
And maybe they're not quite getting there alone just in the lessons. We've talked about interventions a lot. I think there is a ceiling to how useful they are. I think we do a lot of maths, a lot of English especially, and sometimes doing an extra 20, 30 minutes doesn't really help that much, especially if it's at the sacrifice of maybe taking them out of a history lesson. I do still think that feels wrong. But what I would say is I've been doing some interventions, short, sharp interventions instead of grouped with children, but doing them on their own. And I just want to talk about that difference now, because I think traditionally I've done a lot of interventions where you group together 4 to 6 children.
Yeah.
That's 4 to 6, not 46. That would be quite a lot. And you work with them maybe for half an hour, and you've grouped them because maybe they're a bit weaker in their arithmetic, and you think, okay, well, today we're going to look at some fractions.
Yeah.
You work as a group, and even when it's 4 to 6, 1 or 2 kind of get it. 3 to 4 kind of don't, and
sure.
There's still that it doesn't feel like the best use of that child's time because they've missed half an hour of PE.
Yeah.
So what I've swapped it to is doing intervention with the same children, but instead of doing 40 minutes with a group of 4, I'm doing 10 minutes per child individually. One-to-one.
Right.
So they come to me. I look at their most recent assessment. I look where their gaps are. I see if it was a mistake where they just made a mistake, but they can do it. I'll move on immediately. Or if it's something they really don't understand, I then immediately can say to them, cool, well, this is how you do it. Let's practice it, practice it, and target exactly what that child can't do. And I guess my opinion, having done that, is that is incredibly powerful.
But they're getting a quarter of the time.
They are getting a quarter of the time, but every single minute is bespoke to exactly what they need.
So you're saying that a quarter of the time bespoke is actually genuinely better, and you get more out of it than doing 4 times the length of time, but they're not the only child getting that.
I think in many situations, in this situation right now, where we're plugging specific gaps, I think there comes a point where the one-to-one is more powerful. I think maybe towards the start of the year, when you're introducing something for the first time, maybe you're doing some pre-teaching, maybe you're going over some year 3 objectives if you're in year 4 now. I think I'm not saying let's get rid of group interventions whatsoever, because I think there's a really big drive, and I think group work is very powerful and can be amazing and has so many pros. All I'm saying is I think we should be open to understanding in school that a one-to-one conference almost has a place. And not only does it have a place in specific situations, it's way more powerful. And I would say working with those children, I think at this point in the year when I'm plugging gaps, this is more powerful.
Isn't it funny though how where teaching has been so like saturated by like you have to be ticking off 900 boxes at a time, right? That there's a part of me that's like, oh, one-to-one though, I don't know, because you're using up a lot of time there. You're only helping 1 kid when you could be helping 2.
Yeah,
you could be helping maybe even 30.
Yeah,
like, we're so used to like the idea that and you got to be doing more, got to be more effective, got to be helping more, and it's kind of become the more kids you help at once, the more effective it is, and you're kind of challenging that really and saying, actually, I found that I can have a bigger impact doing one-to-one in some of this time. I think it's interesting.
Cost effective to impact. And I think sometimes it's cost effective to do group interventions and group work, and also has a better impact.
Yeah,
I think there's plenty of reasons why you should still do that. All I'm saying is let's not completely shut the door to the one-to-one, thinking, it's too expensive for a school. We can't possibly justify a specialist teacher with 1 child. No, we absolutely can actually. And I think in this situation, it works really well.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you for that. I mean, in a minute, we're going to talk to Maddie Moate. And before we do that, I just want to get a really quick understanding of what we feel about this. Because we're going to be talking about STEM subjects. She's like the STEM lady. Like she's the expert, you know what I mean, to go to. And obviously we work in primary schools. She doesn't work in a primary school. No. So it'd just be interesting to get our kind of thoughts on STEM subjects. Because I'm going to start with this. Obviously, STEM is science, technology, engineering, and maths. Seems a bit weird because maths is almost like we all do maths to death, but the science and engineering and technology, where does that sort of stand? And science used to be in the end of year 6, like the SATs exam. There used to be a science test. There would have been when we were children. Yeah. So we can talk about that in a minute. And in 2009, they took that out. Yet data seems to have, like, so we still do teacher assessment. At the end of the year, I have to put in a teacher assessment for all the kids in my class for how they're getting on with science. Data has remained, if anything, it's gone up. We're seeing on average about 80% of children at the end of each year are passing their science. It's just even better than like maths and English. The national averages in maths and English are more in like the 70s. So clearly taking away the assessment of science has done really well. But I feel like, I don't know about you, but I feel like that's not reflected in the classroom whatsoever. Like I feel like science has absolutely taken a complete backseat.
Yeah, I want to rewind a bit to when you said about STEM, about science, technology, engineering, and maths. And you're like, well, we do a lot of maths in school. I still think we're missing a huge chunk of what STEM really should be, which is applied maths.
Right.
I think a lot of what we do, just so people listening thinking, oh yeah, they do the maths. Yeah, we do. And it's really important in primary school, especially, that we really, get the fundamentals in place. But I do think there's not a lot of opportunity for the children to apply maths in a real life situation. Such a good point. I think science takes a backseat massively. Yeah. And this really challenges us, I think. And I'd love to hear your take on this, because like you said, we got rid of science as a assessed subject in the SATs end of year 6 in 2009, but science remained a core subject. So when we say the core subjects, we say in English, maths, and science, and the rest we call foundation subjects. And there's a clear line. And you know what? I think rightly. I think it's okay to put maths, English, and science on a pedestal and just say this is more important because of so many reasons that we can go into. However, we took science out of the SATs. and kept it as a core subject, like I said. And what's happened then with science is it became this really weird limbo subject that kind of floats above importance with history and geography and art and etc. So it's more important than that. But I work in a school and data's really important, and then my school's going to be judged on the SATs results, and science. It's not an assessed thing anymore.
It's really important though, right?
It's very important, but it's not assessed anymore. So talk to any teacher who's been doing it since 2009 or previously and throughout this whole change. They will tell you that the amount of science going on in school has reduced.
Yeah, definitely.
And when you match that up with the scores and the teacher assessment has actually gone up, and somehow our results are better in science, but we're doing less of it in school. It really challenges my opinion of, or the opinion I hear of, getting rid of the SATs completely. Yeah. Because in having got rid of science assessment, it feels like the importance of it and the amount of emphasis on it in schools has reduced massively. And then by just saying teacher assessment comes into it, it's easier for us to tick boxes and say, well, yes, we did this, we did that, and you're expected. Where do you land on that? Because how does it make you feel about English and maths being assessed? Well, because it's assessed, it seems to be more important. Yeah. Should we bring back more assessment, or do you still think we should get rid of it?
This is where I feel like a bit of a hypocrite, okay? Because I'm all for, like, I'm constantly saying on this podcast, like, we should trust teachers, like, we're professionals, for Christ's sake, trust us. Why do we have so many, like, Ofsted, when we talk about Ofsted? Like, just trust us, we know what we're doing. But then when it comes to teacher assessments, it's like, but writing and science seem always really, really high in their teacher assessments, and like way higher than average.
So we're not tested for any ambiguity here. Children are not assessed in terms of a test in writing and science, right?
They are teacher assessed only. So there is way more freedom for the teacher to just at the end of the year put down what the children are in those two subjects. And I just think it gets bodged. I really do. I'm not saying everyone does that, but I do think on average, I think the scores are higher than reality.
Writing gets bodged.
Writing gets bodged always. I know it does. I literally know. I've worked in this game for 10 years. I could tell you 50 people or schools I know of where I literally know they've bodged it.
Yeah.
Right? And the same with science. Science is even easier. There's not even a moderation. Like science at the end of the year is honestly just, did your kids get it or not? Yes or no. Yeah. Honestly. Yeah. That is it. Like it's like just one sheet that you do. So there's part of me where I'm like, well, yeah, I'm not surprised we have assessments, because like some teachers will fake the data.
Well, not even some. It's just systemic in terms of, if we see ourselves being judged so harshly on something, why would we do ourselves a disservice and say, actually, no? There's an argument to say that. In a test environment, a child might not portray everything they know. And when it comes to English and maths, how many children have we seen before who, as a teacher, we would, without bodging, rightly say, oh, they are solid in maths. They are expected. They're where they should be. On my teacher assessment, I'm not bodging anything because it doesn't go anywhere, but I just know this child is expected. Oh my gosh, I got their SATs result. They bombed on the day.
They only got a 98 standardized score, which puts them as working towards, despite being so close to what I know.
And that's where people would say, well, maybe it's not being bodged. Maybe it's got higher because actually the test is a bad way of testing them.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is, I don't know the answer. And the only thing, coming full circle maybe before we talk to Maddie about this, and again, Maddie's this person who's so passionate about sharing curiosity and getting children to think and figure out and go and find out how stuff works. Like, her literal book is called How Does It Work? She's going to talk about her book she's written for children. I am so sure that we are not allowing our children that ability to show curiosity and have child-led learning and finding things out scientifically in the classroom. That has gone. That does not exist. It exists. Okay, it exists in some schools really well.
There'll be some teacher being like, I do that still.
Yeah, sure. But on the whole, oh my goodness, we've moved to such a knowledge-based curriculum, haven't we?
It's been pushed out. It's boring. It's boring. The most science schemes now, it's all about how much can you remember about these facts.
Yeah.
Honestly, it is. You get the okay. And you know what? On the other side of it, there's also no money. So I'm not surprised there's schemes that have come in for schools where schools are like, hey, we need to teach science. We've absolutely no budget for literally anything. But can we try and make it as interesting as possible where we don't actually get to do anything fun? Yeah. So loads of schemes gone and being like, okay, cool. Our scheme's really cheap, by the way, and you don't need all of this equipment and stuff that you don't already have because it'd be impossible otherwise. So here's a scheme where we just focus on these other things, and you don't know. Okay, we're just gonna do a science lesson, and they're just gonna write in their books, and they can read something from this textbook. It's really cheap, and they'll learn something about science. It's got so boring.
And there's a piece of paper there and it says, this is the definition of what a particle is. And isn't that cool that we know what particles are? Do you know what? Do you know what is cool for a primary school kid? is just to ask really interesting questions about things and experiment with stuff and just see what happens. And then as the teacher, answer questions as you go.
I did that as a kid.
Yeah.
I actually remember, I still remember so well, and I've got a terrible memory, so this must have been good. I remember doing this science session where we were like, we had loads of test tubes and all of these, like these people actually came in. I think it was like a little, like a event, the course thing they did. And we were just like, we had lab coats on. It was all really like cringy cliche. And we had these little test tubes and vials, and we were putting liquids in and mixing things, and they were doing fun things. And some of them made like gases and they smelled. And then they were like, oh, if you tap the bottom, you can really like make it, you can make it start reacting a bit more. And we were like, experiment. I was like, this is the funnest thing I've ever done in my whole life.
Stop. Sorry. Have you got your book out and writing down the definition of particle?
No.
Oh, it's not science, I'm afraid, because I can't then prove that you know what a particle is, I'm afraid.
And then my science teacher, probably the next day, I imagine, would have then used that as a hook and be like, oh yeah, what you doing yesterday, by the way, this is the actual learning. And I was super into it. But on top of that, like with DT and stuff, I know we're going to talk to Maddie in a second, but like all of it, STEM subjects when I was a kid,
engineering
just felt way more, I did them.
And
we built stuff.
Did it feel like it mattered too much in the moment as a primary school child specifically, that you couldn't like turn around and say to someone, this is engineering because of that? And,
no,
and it didn't matter because
I didn't care.
You were doing it without, I remember we made slippers in year 5.
Yes.
We made slippers. I remember we made a remote control car basically in year 6. But I remember this stuff and it's vivid to me. And I remember things about, I can make something. Do you know what? I'm going to make a car. And as I'm making the car and I say, wait, what makes this motor turn? Let's talk about it. Stored energy in the battery.
Why is mine falling apart? Well, actually, if you use right angles and triangles, you can make stronger structures out of it. Oh, okay, cool. I get that now. That completely makes sense because I'm using it practically right now in real life. Yeah.
What we have is it's children in front of us who are the most curious people I've ever met in my life. Yep. And what I find is we are not harnessing that enough. And this is why I'm so excited to talk to Maddie. Yeah. Maddie has presented shows on CBeebies. She's done work with the BBC before. She has her own YouTube channel where she explains how things work, but not only in a way which links to the curriculum and teachers can find really useful, but also in a way that actually just children on their own, like me when I was a young boy, I would click on that video and be engrossed by it. Yeah. I would be completely engrossed by you showing me science and doing things and just finding things out and inspiring me to move on. And I get way more inspiration from that than I think children in the classroom do when they're doing a boring science lesson.
Do you know what I think we should do right now?
What should we do right now?
I think it's time that we should just go and talk to Maddie and get her thoughts and feelings on this subject.
Let's do it. I am delighted to introduce the BAFTA award-winning BBC children's TV presenter, Olivier Prize-nominated West End superstar, YouTube extraordinaire, over 300,000 subscribers, who now, today, is striking her best achievement ever, which is being a guest on a Teach, Sleep, Repeat podcast. We've got Maddie Moate. Welcome, Maddie.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you. And I did see a little sneak peek there. I don't know if we all saw that, because we do record this podcast. So if you're watching, a little bit of a treat.
Well, I've actually got something for both of you. I'm here to present you with the best podcast in the world 2025. Your very own BAFTA. Here you go.
That is fantastic. For
I'm just covering the base, which is my name on it, but that's beside the point.
We'll just like scribble that bit out. The kids are good at that, so we'll do the same.
And I would like to say for everybody watching, this was not my idea.
Oh, you had to get it in there.
Listen. We logged on and you had your BAFTA in the background. We were just like, Maddie, come on,
stop it, stop it. Yeah. No, I didn't.
we requested that. That's fine. How are you doing anyway, Maddie? Because
really good, thank you.
You must be quite
really
busy
good
right now.
Yeah, it's a really busy time of year. And March always is, actually, and I think that's true for a lot of science communicators because it's Science Week. And I think everybody sort of like kicked into gear after, a slow start when everyone's sort of like putting things into action, and March suddenly feels where everything's going again. The sun's out, people are doing things. So yeah, March always feels like a pretty busy time.
Well, thank you for joining us. Really, what I want to dive into before we talk about your amazing achievements, like your book, I really want to talk about your book a little bit later because that's coming out. Well, for our listeners, it'll be out right now. But before we talk about that, I want to dive into you a little bit more and just explore how you became who you are now. Because you've been in this game for a long time. So I'd really just like to know, how did you end up in this position? Like, what's the life story here?
Gosh, that's a good question. It's always a hard one to know when to start. So I'll kind of give you the short notes version, and then like tell me if you want me to elaborate on anything. But I would say, so as a kid, I really loved both science and drama, if I'm going to sort of like use subjects, if you like, and had always taken part in school plays and had been interested in dance lessons and had done a whole bunch of extracurricular drama stuff. But I loved science, but it wasn't something I had done really outside of school. There weren't any clubs when I was younger, and I certainly didn't have any role models. And when it came to, being was still really a very, very young person at 16, I think I had to make my choices as to what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. I was sort of stuck a little bit between deciding whether I wanted to continue with drama or go for science. And I decided to pursue drama when I went to university. And I think the reason I picked it was because I already sort of felt like I was on the ladder because of all of that extracurricular stuff that I had already been doing. Whilst with science, I didn't understand what a life would look like as a scientist. For me as a young woman, it was very much just, I guess what, I wear a lab coat and just hang around in a lab with old men with crazy hair. That's kind of what it felt like for me. It just so happened that eventually TV companies were starting to look to YouTube for new talent, and CBeebies, a channel who I now work with, often, they were looking for new talent. They didn't want an actor. They didn't want someone who was going to dress up or be a character. They wanted someone who's just used to being themselves. And they found me presenting for various natural sciences and tech brands online. And they asked if I'd be interested in hosting this new series called Do You Know? And reluctantly, I said yes at first. Reluctantly at first, I said no.
Right.
Because for me at the time, I was, I'd been making science and tech videos at that point for adults for, nearly sort of 5-6 years. Oh, okay. And my understanding of CBeebies then was that it was just Mr. Tumble, and that was it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And that if I did CBeebies, I would definitely be...
You need to paint your nose red.
Yeah, but honestly, I was like, I don't know, it feels a bit sugary, a little bit like, or potentially a bit patronising for the kids watching. But they were really keen to do something new and to have me being me and have me being out and about in real places. So yeah, I said yes, and it was absolutely the best thing I ever did. It totally transformed like my trajectory in terms of what I do now, which is very much still focused in science education and talking to people about science and tech. I just do it for a younger audience predominantly. That wasn't actually a very short version, so I apologise.
If that's the short version, I want to hear the long version.
You did not stop me.
No, I want to hear everything because but it's really interesting because I'll be honest, I'll level with you. Hayden and I know Hayden did a film degree as well.
Oh yeah, nice.
And we've both been very interested in drama before. And I guess what I wanted to ask you is, you've kind of unlocked this power of using online, let's say, video creation to step into the world of helping younger children as well. And that's a bridge that is quite contentious at the minute with some people in terms of, screen time for young children, the algorithm, wondering where you land in terms of harnessing this for good, because I think Hayden and I passionately believe that there is a really good way to use this technology to help children. But there's also the dark side of it where children can kind of go down a rabbit hole that's bad. So where do you land on that? Honestly,
you've tapped into like one of my passion subjects at the moment, and it's something I don't have a completely clear answer for. But you're right. On one hand, I sit sort of in the camp of the BBC. A lot of my programming has been with the BBC over the years, although, I'm a freelancer, ultimately. I don't just work for them. But the BBC make some of the best, if not the best, children's content in the world. And you can absolutely trust it. You know that your children are going to be safe, and you can put your child in front of CBeebies guilt-free and know that they're going to have a beneficial experience. But you cannot say the same for YouTube. However, I am making content for kids and families on YouTube, and this sort of the YouTube scene is constantly changing, and their rules are constantly changing as well. But I just try to stay as close to my public service BBC values as I possibly can on a platform that doesn't enforce them. Yeah. It's also very hard for YouTube to enforce them because they say, we're just a platform for people to upload things. Yeah. They don't want to take responsibility for the content that people are putting out there. So it's really hard for them to sort of decide what isn't okay when it comes to kids' content, because as soon as they start making those sort of decisions, then they become more of a broadcaster as opposed to just a platform.
Yeah.
But there are certain things that I am trying to promote, and not on behalf of YouTube, just because I think that kids these days, and when I'm saying kids, I'm talking children under the age of 13. I don't think personally, do what you want as parents and, grown-ups, but I think it's best for children under 13 not to have social media accounts. And I think if they are watching YouTube, it's best to watch it in a place that's safe, that you can control, and put certain boundaries around a place where you can sort of be mindful of what the child is watching. And I know that one of the reasons why both teachers and parents are reluctant to use YouTube is because there's just this scary algorithm that once it works out what you or your child wants to watch or likes to watch, it's just going to show you it again and again and again. And that's not necessarily the sort of thing you want your children to be watching on repeat. But if you use the YouTube Kids app, there are ways that you can set the channels that your child is able to watch. So rather than having free reign of all YouTube, they can have free reign. So still a classic scrollable experience, but they're only going to be offered videos within the channels that you decide they can watch. And you can make that as broad or as niche as you like. But I do think that there needs to be more education, and I would love to find a way to make parents more aware of these boundaries that you can place within the YouTube Kids app. So that's something I'm working on. It's a constant challenge though, because that you can also mark your videos on YouTube as made for kids, which is something that I choose to do. The problem with that though is there's not really any incentive for YouTubers or creators to do it, because the moment you do that, it takes away comments on the videos. On one hand, I see why that's not a bad thing, because it means that you're not going to have negativity, bullying, or inappropriate comments for a child to read. But equally, it immediately takes away any form of community that they could be part of. And it also takes away their feeling of, just their ability to be involved.
Yeah, they want to get in touch with you, don't they? You could be their idol on YouTube. You can be the kind of person they go to, and they can't. It's kind of just like they watch it, call out. That's where YouTube's different to television, isn't it? Because you have that connection, or you can.
And it's tough, because I don't necessarily think it's healthy for adult content creators to be making relationships with young children. I don't think that's right. But I do think they should be able to leave opinions. I do think they should be able to let the creators know what they like and what they don't like. And I feel like there's got to be some sort of middle ground where, for people who are putting up kids content, that I think there should be a way of having monitored comment section as opposed to none at all. Children are savvy. They're on the internet. Of course. Taking the ability to comment on something away from them is just going to make them feel like, what? No, it's going to make them feel like they're a small little kid. And that's not the case if you're a 10-year-old child. You need to give them that ability. You don't want to take those things away from them. Definitely. But I refuse to allow YouTube to be completely barren of good content. And I really do believe that if there are enough people doing the right thing who create a community in the same way that other smart YouTube communities have done, I do think you can help rise together. And I think the algorithm does, it needs similarities to it's just stupid artificial intelligence. It's not smart. It needs to have lots of video. Exactly. So the more those of us who are really trying hard to make good quality, trusted, sort of like guilt-free content for children, and I think the more of it there is, I do think it will start to rise through the ranks. But one thing I've tried to do, because, I have had some successes on YouTube, the growth is slow, but is that I'm trying to find videos or video titles that both a child might click on, but also would be something that's potentially helpful to people like yourselves, to educators who might be looking for additional content to make their classes more exciting, but aren't necessarily academic explainers.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, how a Jack in the Box works is actually a really good way to talk about the science of springs. So you're talking about sort of stored energy and different types of energy. It's a really good way to start thinking about that. And there's a little make in there as well that I know that classrooms could make really simple. All you need is some paper to make a spring. Or let's say if I'm thinking about, I'm trying to think of other videos I've made. Oh, so I went to Iceland last year to film a bunch of content. And one of my videos is how is bread baked in a frozen lake. Now that's quite like a clicky title. It's something that, kids will go, huh? What?
Even
Bread
adults.
in a
I'm
lake.
like, what? Tell me more.
Exactly. But that's it. Brilliant. If I can get families watching together, even better.
Yeah.
But actually, that video is a lesson about geothermal energy, which I know that every teacher at some point will need to be touching on with their pupils when they're thinking about different energy types. Yeah. So I'm like, what's the clicky cool title that can make teachers' lives a bit easier?
I think that's a good play. That's a good play. Because I'm telling you right now, you're talking to two teachers who work in primary schools. We've worked in primary schools for the last decade, and video content is great. I use it all the time. Like I wouldn't say I don't sit there and put on an hour and a half video and put my feet up, But I will use video in lessons all the time.
Do you remember we filmed some for maths?
Yeah, we literally one day were like, shall we basically film like
this was 2016, 2017.
Yeah, that was a long time ago. So we had an objective we wanted to teach, and we were like, we know kids engage with the screen to the point where I could literally record me saying the same thing that I'd say to them in person and put it on a YouTube video, and they'd be 3 times more engaged because it's on the screen.
Interesting.
It's mad, right? Honestly, and it would be the same content. So we went away and just made a bunch of videos, like silly little videos. It's just like 40-second things, but it introduced a real life problem to them. It was like how to cut a baguette into thirds or some random.
Yeah, it was fractions.
Really it was fractions. That's what it was. Yeah, and we were like kicking a football.
We played Super Mario Odyssey, and you have to collect 50 coins, and he had 26 out of 50, and we said, what percentage is that?
Yeah,
and it's like...
But that's it. You're coming at it from what it feels like a trendy, cool angle. It's just the fact it's on YouTube, which is a platform that isn't something all the kids might be allowed to be on. But also you're using Super Mario, you're using like food and baguettes. Like, you can come at it in a slightly different angle that you just might not be able to in a classroom because of the limitations that are put on you.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm curious to ask you though. So when you're looking for video content, something I often wonder about is how I should be titling my videos. Because would it be easier if I titled my videos, how does a jack-in-the-box work? Plus science of springs for primary school children. But then if I do that, then that little extra bit in the title is going to be off-putting to the kids. Yeah. So it's like, how I often wonder, like, how are educators finding the videos that they want to supplement their teaching with?
I suppose if you're thinking about it through the lens of it's the educator searching for it, then we're just going to search for those terms, the scientific terms. In all honesty, I wouldn't be searching for Jack-a-Box. I'd be searching for how do springs work, explain for children. That's like a classic term, explain for children. I'm always typing that on Google.
For kids.
Literally for kids. For kids. Yeah, exactly.
Maybe I just need to start putting. So, do I just start putting science for kids at the bottom?
Yeah. There's one thing I'd really like to touch back on. Earlier on, you mentioned about role models. You're saying when you were younger, there wasn't a role model, and you sort of mentioned like the classic man with white hair, old man. Does that play on your mind a bit? Like now, because you kind of have filled that role. Like you are now a role model for younger children in STEM subjects. Like,
yeah, it's interesting. Like people often say, "Who are your science role models as a kid?" And there are 2 that I can mention. One was David Attenborough, and I think even David Attenborough himself would admit, he's the presenter of the natural history programs, and he's more of a figurehead than anything else. But he himself isn't a trained scientist, and he's a TV guy ultimately. But for me as a kid, I saw him as like peak science, or natural history. And the other person, the only woman I can think of who I found, inspiring when I was younger, was Dr. Ellie Sattler, who was the doctor in Jurassic Park.
Oh, yeah.
I was thinking who?
Yeah, she's the paleobotanist in Jurassic Park. The one who,
Yeah.
I was like, who is this awesome, cool woman who's like fixing up dinosaurs and studies like Jurassic plants? I was like, I want to be her. Problem, she was very much a fictional character.
Doesn't that say something?
Exactly. But the thing now, I would say, like in my experience, I do think this is changing. I think that people are being, whether that's new media or old media, we are seeing so much more diversity across the board when it comes to sort of faces in STEM. It's not perfect, and I would say on YouTube especially, there's definitely still a lot more, white guys in science than anything else. But I do think in television especially that people are being really considerate about making sure that there is diversity. However, I'm aware that I now sort of live in a world of science communicators, and my world is surrounded by opportunities to talk to different scientists. I'm always meeting different women who are doing incredible things in STEM. But I'm aware that that still probably isn't true for most people. So I think my view might be a little bit biased towards my experience.
Yeah. No, but I think that's important. And I think what we sometimes miss, we come almost full circle with, we kind of all agreed this is really important, we're going to push for it. We're kind of coming full circle back where there's a growing voice of people who say, oh, well, we've got there now. What's the point? We don't need this anymore. And you talk about your experience. Oh, whatever, it's okay. I think Hayden and I are very passionate about we still need a push for it. And we're two white guys. We're two middle-aged, not middle-aged yet, but we're getting there. We're white blokes, and we're just in the primary world.
Extremely young.
Extremely young, but the primary world's dominated by women. Yeah. We have a podcast where our voice is kind of amplified almost, and we have lots of people who listen. And I don't know, I want to ask you, what would be your defense of this push for inclusion? Why is it still so important? What's it going to do that's an actively good thing by promoting different voices?
Well, something I notice, I think it's probably best that I talk about just simply women in STEM, because that's my experience. I can't really talk about it for others, but it seems to be the case that even though primary school age kids might be seeing more diversity or more women in STEM, whether that's on the television or whether that's or wherever you get your content, it doesn't necessarily mean that girls are then choosing science more. I still think there's clearly a drop-off in interest. And that interest, that does seem to be sort of like, when girls are hitting sort of like the early teenage years, it seems to be like very, very interested in science. And then sort of like when they sort of get to like after 9, I don't know the exact stats, but I'm pretty sure that's when you start seeing the drop off in young girls who are actually who will say they are interested in STEM subjects.
I think I read that exact thing earlier. I was doing just a bit of research thinking about this earlier, and I saw something along the lines of, since the 80s in the USA and the UK. Exactly what you said. Like, there's a huge drop off now, like a bigger drop off than ever before.
That's when people choose, isn't it, as well?
Like the choice is actually like people. We're seeing fewer women getting into STEM subjects sort of in teenage years when they choose, than in the 80s. I thought that was crazy.
And so I think, you got to think why. You're like, okay, so we're presenting more opportunities and we're presenting more diversity to young people, to young girls, but they clearly still don't feel like it's for them. You've got to go, okay, why? And I mean, I've got a couple of theories, and I think one of them is this. Okay, I'm being very general here, but I do think that young girls like to sort of see where they're going and like to sort of see the point in something before they necessarily invest a lot of time into it. So from my experience, one of the reasons I picked, theatre, film and television, I had a great time, by the way, nothing wrong with choosing the arts at all. But the reason I picked that was because I sort of felt like I already had made some kind of had already carved a bit of a path for myself, because I'd been doing all of that extracurricular, all of those extracurricular activities. I don't necessarily think, though, there are the same opportunities in science and engineering. There are some out there. There's some great opportunities, like the Institute of Engineering and Technology. They run First Lego League, which is where you can get, groups of schools can get together and create Lego robots, essentially. I think Formula One might do some sort of extracurricular thing as well, where again groups of students can create essentially their own kit cars. So there are some extracurricular things, but not in the same social way that you have with drama. And I think that young girls would potentially stay interested if there were more extracurricular social things that they could do outside of school. Because I think you still have that question, but well, what does a career in science look like for me? That's a long way off. What about right now? How is it relevant to me right now? And I think finding ways to make it accessible and fun outside of school, so that it exists beyond the realm of a subject. And I think that's the other thing as well, is that I understood that yes, I could do drama at school, but as an option, but I knew that drama meant a career on the stage or in TV or and YouTube didn't even really exist back then for
You
me.
carved it. You made
Right.
it.
But
Yeah.
with science was very much physics, chemistry, and biology.
Yeah.
And I didn't really know what a physicist was. Truth is, there are so many different types of physicist. I sort of a biologist. I was like, well, what is that? Again, so many different types of ologists, but I didn't know that. And the same with chemistry. And I think sometimes I wish that we were able to teach kids around topics, and we were able to focus on sort of like on children leading their interest and curiosity a little bit more, so that we could bring science subjects into their interests, rather than be like, here are the boxes that we have to fit the subjects into, and you either like them or you don't.
Yeah.
And so I think girls would respond better to that.
100%. I'm listening to what you're saying, like cheering it on as a primary school teacher as well, because especially in primary school, we are so blessed to have young children with us all day, because they are the most inquisitive, curiosity-packed human beings I've ever met. They will ask anything. They will say, why is the sky blue? And I'll be like, well, I can tell you if you want. And we sometimes it feels like as teachers, we are so restricted by, let's be honest very quickly, our maths and English data driving the way through. So we've got to get English and maths all the way. Yeah, we've got to make sure, because in year 6, they do their test and we need to make sure the data is really good. It means science is this really weird middle ground where it's a core subject still. So it's with English, maths and science. They're the core subjects, but only English and maths have the test where we have data that we're judged on as a school. So science is this weird middle ground where it gets left behind, and we are very quickly teaching, okay, I've got year 4 science. I'm teaching states of matter, solid, liquid, gases. I'm just going to tell the kids what they are. This is what a particle looks like. We've got to move on to the next thing.
Right.
And I really want to dive into now, maybe talking about your book, because as a school teacher, I love seeing publications like this, what you've put together, because I feel like there's so many children in my class who I struggle with the fact that I feel like I'm not feeding their curiosity or helping them with this in the confines of the curriculum. But I can say to them, why don't you go and read this book? Because you can find out how an X-ray works. I'm never going to tell you about that, but you can dive into it. And it's so important. And I think what my question is to you is, what role do you see yourself as playing as not a teacher in a classroom, but very much a teacher in a different respect, I think, in fostering that and almost filling that gap? Do you see yourself as doing that?
I see it as my responsibility, and this is whether I'm making a YouTube video, a podcast, or a book. And this is something that I think I'm taking more and more seriously, and I've come to realize as I've been doing this for quite a few years now, is that I see it as my responsibility to bring story back into the equation. Because I think when you are, like you've said, when you're having to teach things in a short amount of time and you're just having to tick the boxes, I feel like young children learn best and are most invested in something, if it's just one of their interests, or if there's an element of story. So when it came to writing my latest book, How Does It Work? I have seen a lot of how do things work books out there in the past. And typically, like, they're brilliant books, but typically you might have a page of, let's say, water machines, and there'll just be different machines and you lift the flaps and that's it. Or there might be lots of little explanations for things that are in the air, for example. And I was like, that's all well and good, but where's the story? Where's the incentive for the child to keep reading? So what I decided to do with this book was that I sort of split it into 4 chapters or 4 stories. And yes, on each page, there are different objects with little explainers as to how they work. But the reader is placed on a mission across those pages. So the first story is you have to find missing parts of a remote control car. So you are looking for missing parts throughout the illustrations. And then you get to the final page and you find out how a remote control car works, because you found all those missing pieces. And on that final page is a maze. So the child then has to race the remote control car through the maze. There's a puzzle for them to solve. So along the way, they have visited a kitchen and they found out how a fridge works. They have been in a living room and they found out how a television works. But actually, if they have chosen, rather than, just to look at the pictures, which is fine, but if they've chosen to read the text and play the part of the game, they've actually been involved in the story a little bit, which I think sort of gives you an incentive to keep reading and actually take in more information. So that's the way I decided to lay it out, was just to make sure that I could take something that traditionally hasn't had story placed in it and find a way to put it in there, so that the children who might say, well, science isn't for me, will actually pick it up and go, oh, but I like puzzles. I like games. I like finding things. I like noticing things. I like being observant. I like asking questions. All of those things are key to science. But it's really hard to explore that in a classroom when you've just got to teach states of matter.
Especially, in a curriculum that is just round with here's knowledge, learn it, move on. That that really is like where it's become.
And I feel for you. I really do.
In primary school, it's different to secondary schools, but secondary school is a whole other world. Like, earlier on you mentioned about topic-based learning. We kind of do that a lot more, I'd say, in primary schools. But I know in secondary schools, it's biology, chemistry, and physics. And I remember one like just a quick story from a while ago, like in a school I worked in maybe like 6 or 7 years ago. It was actually a really rich curriculum for like topic-based curriculum. I actually loved that. I loved teaching in that school because it was all about, let's just get engaged with this cool thing and let's draw the science out of it and let's draw the engineering out of it, essentially, draw the DT and art, whatever. And then one day, Ofsted came in, Ofsted, and said, "Oh, but do the children know that this is biology? Though they're calling this topic, whatever it was called, the Mayans, and it was history or something." And it's like, they are doing they don't know it's biology though. They don't know that this is physics, so this is not very good. And then the school ended up changing it. Because we need to be more explicit. So we're going to get rid of topics. We're going to go back to doing biology lessons, so the children know they're learning biology. We're going to do chemistry. We don't do much chemistry in
we do bits school, though. But, we do.
Little bits of it. And I just thought, oh my god, like, what's the point?
It just seems so Jurassic. I mean, look, I don't know how you could change the school system overnight, and I would not want that job. So I'm sort of talking here with a complete lack of experience. But it does seem like in a world where really, we need to be teaching our children how to, I mean, I can't believe I'm saying this, but actually how to ask prompts of artificial intelligence correctly, and how to Google search things efficiently, and how to understand when you're getting a good answer versus a bad answer. Yeah. Like, the way we understand and the way that we learn and know things as adults now is based on our ability to search and find trustworthy, good information. And actually just sort of like feeding kids information to then tick off in an exam isn't actually a really good example of how we operate in the world as adults. Because as adults, I think these days in 2025, what you want is for someone to just be curious, be interested, and to ask questions and know how to search out the right information.
Yeah.
Like, nobody's a walking dictionary or a walking encyclopedia anymore. Nobody has to be.
That's what
which
we're
is
trying
a
to
beautiful
create.
thing.
But that is what it ends up feeling like. And I've got to say, the number of times I've been stood in a lesson and I'm delivering, let's say, a science lesson, and the children, I could say a sentence about states of matter. I could say, we have solids, liquids, and gases. And without even doing any kind of prompt or looking at what I've prepared earlier, 2 or 3 children have their hand up and go, well, what about honey? Because that moves quite slowly, doesn't it? And then we can talk about viscosity, and we can talk about that. What about flour? Because you can pour flour, but you said that liquids can be poured and solids can't. But is flour a solid? And these most unbelievable prompts, which should really, from that point, spark the lesson.
Yes.
I feel as the teacher, sometimes I have to be like, oh, what a great question. Wait a minute, though, because I've got to get through these 7 other things, and then we're going to maybe talk about that at the end. And I'm saying to children, okay, guys, hands down, please, because I'm going to tell you stuff that I already know, because I feel like I've got to tick this box. And it feels so broken. And as someone who's not in the teaching world, I'd love your opinion on how crazy that sounds, if it does sound crazy to you.
Well, it's mad, because that you've just immediately given me an idea for a YouTube video. Like, how clicky is the title? Is flour a liquid?
Right.
With just a thumbnail of me pouring flour, looking confused.
Literally.
But then that YouTube video would be unbelievable to have as my prompt in that lesson at the start. I know the lesson right now.
if you can find it.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Because you would only find it if I titled it States of Matter for Kids.
Yeah, year 4 or
year 4.
Yeah.
Interest, like but fun.
And in brackets, Dylan, please watch. Yeah, something like that.
You might find it then.
I think that might work.
Find it.
Yeah. Oh,
well, if you do that, let me know, because I will put it into that lesson, and it'll be
a really good idea. Might do.
Going back to your book for a second, because when you were talking, wait a minute. Forget Dylan's silly idea. Sorry. Let's talk about the book. Let's talk about the book. When you were explaining it, I was actually thinking, I can immediately think of someone in my class, a girl in my class right now, who I know will be so into this book. Like, I'm really looking forward to getting a copy and putting it in the classroom.
That's what makes me so happy. My first book was called Stuff, and that was very much about how things are made. And I could have, it could have been very simple. Each page could have been an object, and I could have just described how it's made. But I was like, no, where's the story? Where's the sense of adventure? How do I get children who don't think they're into science to enjoy this? So actually, I found stories that I'm passionate about, and these are people who are based all over the world, communities who are making things, everyday objects, in really interesting, unexpected ways, and in ways that are also good for the planet as well. So it's not just how is paper made, it's how is paper made at a poo paper factory in Thailand. And it's kind of cool because, sure, you learn about paper, you learn about fiber and how, and the various different processes that are required to make paper. But you also get this sense of adventure because you've traveled to Thailand, you're looking at elephants and you're finding out about sustainability and looking after the planet and looking after animals all at the same time. And that's the kind of thing that I think young girls are interested in. God. It's this like, and then what you're sort of stealthily doing is sort of saying, actually, science is this ticket to travel, to adventure. You don't, and no lab coats in sight. You will never see me in a lab coat.
New YouTube video. Maddie Moate wears a lab coat.
I know. I'm now thinking. I'm like, that's just absolutely a lie. I've definitely worn a lab coat in necessary environments.
There's someone listening to this right now going, actually, I've Googled this. Thank you.
That's an absolute lie. I never dress myself in a lab coat for fun. There we go. That's true.
And I don't think I do either. So that's good. But do you know what? There's just I wish we could do, right? It'd be incredibly boring for you, but I wish I could like sit you down in front of like a scheme of work, and I want you to see, because there's loads of schemes of work, right? For primary schools buy into different schemes of work based on what they think is good for their school. There's tons of them. Our school uses one of 100 different. Some really good schemes, some honestly completely rubbish schemes of work out there for science. I'd be so interested one day to like literally just get your take on a whole school scheme of work and like your opinions, because I think it's good, by the way, that you said you're kind of out of this world. That's good. Yeah. Because I think it needs a fresh pair of eyes almost. It'd be so funny.
But to go to Ofsted and say, this is this person's in science. So if this person, if Maddie Moate is saying, why don't we do this? Because this is really important. Ofsted can't turn around and say, oh, no, actually, because in this document that we wrote with some people who sat in a room who talked for a little bit, I've said that. No, listen, you are a scientist. You're saying this.
But I actually think I'm in this sort of bizarre privileged position where I'm not a scientist.
Would you not say you're a scientist?
Well, no. I mean, not technically. I'm not a doctor. I don't have a degree in science. I've always come at this from a point of being interested in curiosity, which I think works. At first I was a little bit like, imposter syndrome. Should I quickly, run back to uni and do a zoology degree or something? But actually now I'm like, oh no, this is actually good because I can be the voice of the kids. Like it's so funny because a lot of people often quote my show back to me, which is Maddie's Do You Know? And they'll be like, parents will say, our kids ask us the question and we always go, Maddie will know. but actually the show always starts with me going, do you know how this is made? Or do you know how that works? Let's find out. Because the truth is I don't know. I don't know anything. It's like what I enjoy is finding these things out. And I think it's my love of doing that I get to share with the kids.
I think you are a scientist.
Yeah, that is science.
Well, but then I would say Something I will say to every child I meet is that you are already a scientist. If you like to look at the world and ask questions, you're a scientist. So technically, I'm not, but I've certainly been a science communicator for a science communicator of 10 plus years. So whatever that earns me,
a BAFTA.
Love that.
Maddie, I've got to say a huge thank you for jumping on with us, because I think for people listening to this, so our audience, very much primary school teachers. I love the idea of them listening to you talk about science passionately as someone outside of the school education system, but very much in the education sector of helping children. I'm very excited to hear what they have to say about it, how you've inspired them. And most importantly, just going back to your book again, I hope there are thousands of teachers now thinking, do you know what? That's a book, and I have a child in my class who I can think of straight away, and I bet everyone listening can have this one child, or even more, I can think of 5 to be honest, who I could put this book in front of, and they will be completely engrossed in really good science, maybe without even knowing that they're engrossed in some really good science. And then we can come in and say, look guys, this is science. And I'm just so excited.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
Hayden, how did you feel about that? Because I loved it.
I could have talked for so much longer. I was very aware of the timings of our podcast, but I would love to talk to Maddie more. I'm just inspired, and I think it's so good that Maddie and other people that do that sort of work, they exist now. I feel like when we were kids, maybe we had more money in school and we were doing these things. Kids now, there's no budget anymore. They need inspiration. They need role models. There are lots of young girls who I know in my class alone, let alone everywhere else, who will look up to Maddie and be like, oh wow, I can do this as well. You know, I just loved it. I loved that chat. I feel like I want to go and teach science better. Teach the STEM subjects better at my school, you know? Yeah,
the big thing for me coming out of it was, I think teachers, sometimes we live in our own little bubble. We think we know best all of the time. We think, okay, well, we've got these, I've taught forever and I know teaching really well. Do you know what? Sometimes it takes someone who is just an expert in something that comes from outside of the teaching world.
Not warped.
Not warped by this kind of idea of just ticking boxes and getting through assessment. Maddie comes from it from a place of loving science and being curious about things. And what I will say is her book's amazing. Just go and see her book. I'll put a link down in the description below. It's been released, like as of today, it's out there now in the world. How does it work? You just heard her explain it. I mean, there's not much more to say other than I can think of genuinely multiple children that I've taught and I'm teaching right now who putting that book in front of them would really inspire them.
Yeah, brilliant. Can't wait to see it.
Amazing. Let's do it. Right. Cool. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for listening. See you next time. And if you've got this far, you know what I'm going to ask you to do. Leave us a review because it helps us so much. And share this podcast with anyone you think who might find it interesting.
Amazing. See you later.
See you later.